What's up everyone, this is White Pointer, bringing you a retrospective video where I look at an old game and see how it fares by today's standards. In this one, I'll be taking a look at a game that's part of one of my favourite series of video games, Legacy of Kain: Soul Reaver. Created by Crystal Dynamics and originally released in 1999 on the PlayStation and PC, it was the first sequel to the highly acclaimed Blood Omen: Legacy of Kain. It was written by Amy Hennig, who went on to write most of the other games in this series, and then the Uncharted games. It also received an enhanced Dreamcast port in 2000. I personally love the Legacy of Kain series, and every game in the franchise really needs a remaster, but to date we don't have any yet. However, this video will just be focusing on Soul Reaver. How does it stack up in 2018? Let's get right to it and find out! The lore surrounding the Legacy of Kain series is oftentimes obtuse, convoluted and lengthy, but I'll try to keep this as concise as possible. In Blood Omen, the vampire Kain was tasked with killing the members of the Circle of Nine, who were the guardians of the Pillars of Nosgoth. The Pillars were kind of the lifeblood of the land, and they had become corrupted due to the Guardians becoming corrupted. At the end of the game, when Kain realised he was the final Guardian, he refused to sacrifice himself, which destroyed the Pillars and reduced Nosgoth to a wasteland. Over the next 1,000 years, Kain built an empire of vampires, starting by raising 6 lieutenants. The first and strongest was Raziel. When Raziel entered a metamorphic state before Kain and evolved wings, in a seemingly act of jealousy, Kain tore the wings from his back and ordered the others to throw him into the watery abyss. The water burned vampire skin like acid, and Raziel was seemingly in torture for an eternity, but finally came to rest and was greeted by an entity that called himself the Elder God. Raziel was no longer a vampire with a hunger for blood. He was a wraith with a hunger for souls, and the ability to shift between the spectral and material realms. The Elder God tells him to go and seek vengeance on Kain, and so begins the story of Soul Reaver. Of course, this is just the start of the lore in the game, and as you progress, it's more than willing to throw more and more at you. Slowly, parts of the story make sense, and others become more obtuse. Some don't make any sense at all until later games in the series. What's Kain actually up to? Did he know ahead of time what would happen to Raziel? Why does the Elder God want Kain dead? What's going on with the actual Reaver blade Kain acquired in Blood Omen? What happened to Nosgoth in the centuries that have passed since Raziel's execution? None of this really becomes clear in Soul Reaver, but the answers are tantalisingly close. It's no doubt some of the best storytelling in the industry. In Soul Reaver, you play as the Wraith Raziel as he pursues vengeance against Kain. Throughout the journey, Raziel will battle enemies, take on huge bosses, solve puzzles, and explore the vast lands of Nosgoth. It's an early 3D game, and as a result, the controls do feel a little stiff and clunky at times compared to modern games. You may find you'll have a bit of trouble positioning yourself in the right spot at times, and while the camera is movable and the game even includes a free look mode, it's still pretty primitive and can't be used while Raziel is moving. They do nevertheless still work pretty well. The combat in general flows pretty smoothly, and there's a multitude of ways you can take out your vampire foes, including sunlight, spiked weapons, water, and wall decorations that make for makeshift stakes. Raziel can also lock on and auto-face the nearest enemy, which is a big help. Once Raziel gains the Soul Reaver Wraith weapon, the focus of the combat changes a bit, but the other weapons in the game never become redundant, as Raziel can only sustain the Wraith blade while his health is full. The exploration in the game is very Metroid-like, in the fact that Raziel gains new abilities that allow him to access areas he previously couldn't, meaning backtracking is required in the game. The addition of a teleporter though, that gives him quick access to the major areas, does make things easier. Raziel can also find glyphs throughout the game that enhance his abilities, although these are not needed in order to finish a story, and are often hidden away inside a complex puzzle off the beaten path. Speaking of puzzles, you need to solve many of them throughout the game, although most of them boil down to one of a few different types, either moving and flipping huge blocks, manipulating the environment somehow such as breaking windows, or opening and closing valves into a correct sequence. Most commonly though, you'll be utilising Raziel's unique ability to shift between the physical and spectral realms. The environment literally morphs around him as he shifts between the realms, which allows him to traverse parts of the terrain he otherwise couldn't. He'll also slip into the spectral realm if he takes too much damage in the material realm. And if he takes too much damage in the spectral realm, he'll respawn back with the Elder God. So he can never really die in the traditional sense. This unique mechanic is a defining characteristic of the game and allows for some pretty ingenious puzzles. Raziel has some special powers that are unique to the spectral realm, but he also can't physically interact with anything or use some of his other abilities, creating an interesting dynamic. Being an early 3D game, it definitely looks a little rough around the edges at the end of 2018, and you're not going to find modern conveniences like analog controls and a camera you can move on the fly here. It is nonetheless a pretty noteworthy technical achievement. The entire game is streamed off the disc with virtually no loading time seen at all, which was unheard of back in 1999. Writer and director Amy Hennig cited this as the biggest technical hurdle for the development team, along with figuring out how to store two sets of data, one for the material and one for the spectral realms, and working out how to seamlessly switch between them. She also says though that it's the achievement she's most proud of with the game. It uses some old techniques for covering up the draw distance as well, including having doors separate larger areas and thick fog engulfing much of the land. I know in this game's context, the fog at least makes sense. It's a huge interconnected world that seamlessly molds together, and the variety in environments is breathtaking, from large fortified cities where the last remaining humans in the land are making their last stand, to a massive derelict cathedral and a drowned abbey. The characters' faces don't animate at all when they're speaking, and even though that's to be expected given when the game was made, it still looks a bit odd these days. On the subject of characters speaking, the voice acting in Soul Reaver, and indeed in the entire Legacy of Kain series, really sets the bar high for video game voice work. Featuring Simon Templeman, Michael Bell, Richard Doyle, Neil Ross, Anna Gunn, and the late great Tony Jay, the cast does a phenomenal job in bringing these characters to life. I can't stress enough how good the voice acting is in the game, especially given that dialogue-heavy narratives that were spoken rather than simply text on the screen was still relatively rare back then, especially on consoles.
So destroy, child. Damn you, Kain! You are not God! This act of genocide is unconscionable! Conscience? You dare to speak to me of conscience? Only when you have felt the full gravity of choice should you dare question my judgment.
Lastly, the music is worthy of praise too. Composed mostly by Kurt Harland, the soundtrack creates a perfect atmosphere for the gothic world the game is set in. It's comprised of amazing large-scale orchestral pieces, mixed with various sound effects to create a truly unique experience. The opening track, titled Ozar Midrashim, is the pinnacle of this, and is simply one of the greatest atmospheric tracks ever recorded. It's so good it's reused in later games in the series. But just listen to some of this other stuff. This is what you hear when you step foot in the drowned abbey. And here's what you hear as you're exploring the necropolis. Truly breathtaking, and some of it seems too good to be in a video game. As for criticisms, there isn't much honestly that aren't simply because it's a product of its time. I will say though that if you're playing the PC version, the default keyboard controls are pretty terrible, so I would definitely recommend using a compatible gamepad if that's what you choose to play on. The PC version can also be difficult to get running properly on modern hardware. Another reason why these games need a remaster. If you can, play on PlayStation or Dreamcast to avoid the technical issues. Having said that, if you can get the game running and have a gamepad that works, the PC version is able to crank the resolution right up to 1920 by 1080 to make it look very nice indeed. The footage in this video was recorded on the PC version. The backtracking nature of the game may be a bit of a turn-off for some players, as it's not always entirely clear where you should be going next. The puzzles, especially the puzzles where you need to move large blocks around, also get tiring after a while, as there are plenty of them. And lots of puzzles require constant swapping back and forth between the material and spectral realms too. There will also be times where you'll find yourself wrestling with the camera. So, is Soul Reaver still worth playing in 2018? I'd say absolutely yes. While the game has undoubtedly aged, it still holds up extremely well and still provides an experience that is not often matched. It's best played as part of the entire Legacy of Kain series, and I'd recommend you give all the games a playthrough at least once, but Soul Reaver itself stands the test of time and continues to be enjoyable. Just beware that you'll find yourself getting sucked into the fascinating overarching story. Have you played Soul Reaver yourself? Do you agree with my assessments? I'd love to hear your opinions. Drop me some comments below and give me a thumbs up if you like the video. Don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date with my content. Thanks for watching!
From this moment and ever afterward, you and this blade are inextricably bound. Soul Reaver and Weaver of Souls, your destinies are intertwined. By destroying the sword, you have liberated it from its corporeal body and restored it to its true form, a radiant blade, its energy unbound. No longer a physical blade, it can only manifest itself in the material realm when your strength is fully restored. Once manifest, it will sustain you.